Hi guys, it's Jim here.
Hey Jim, it's Wendy.
Hey Wendy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. I'm good.
Are you holding it together over there?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're coming out of lockdown. I think you guys are starting to do the same, are you?
Yeah, I think for us it's going to be very phased, and I think Boston's a little bit different than Massachusetts. So, hey Rich.
Hey Rich.
Rich is all excited to get his hair cut.
Well, I can't get my hair cut until July 16th or something. That's or 23rd when the barber's open again.
Wow.
So that's going to be interesting. I was going to go for a buzz cut, but my wife talked me out of it.
My husband's had very white hair since he was about 29, and he's let it grow, and he's also decided not to shave. And I keep saying he looks like Santa Claus without the sweet disposition.
Well, he's very good to you. He gives you plenty of gifts, so he is like Santa Claus.
You didn't get to meet him, but when I was in Dublin earlier this year, he's called himself my service husband. He carried my bags and escorted me all around.
I met him very, very briefly the first night of PDLP. He came in with you, but very briefly.
That's right. Rich, how are you? If we lost Rich, we're in trouble.
Yep. He's still on there, but just 5 people now, 61 registered.
And I know there's a group that has about
Hey,
25.
yeah, people are just coming on now.
Okay.
Rich, we really upped the registrations. That's good.
So have you done many of these, Wendy?
I have, and not specifically related to COVID. We've done a couple. We did a really, really good one for the AHUS community, and they reached out early on. That patient population in particular was very worried about if they were exposed to COVID, it could actually exacerbate or cause them to develop AHUS. And so they had a lot of concerns, and they were very concerned about drug supply. And in that case, we worked with our scientific registry committee, and they actually presented data in a way to really assure the patients that they were, they had to be careful, but they weren't at greater risk, so to speak. And so that went really well. And we did it, and it was supposed to be an hour, and the Q&A went almost 2 hours. And it was early on, so there was really an important need. And then I've done one with a group called Global Genes, more specific to COVID, but that was really around where can you go for resources. And I just think it's really important that we can make ourselves available in this way. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, not at all. No, I think, and would you generally get lots of questions? Because hopefully we do. It'll be good.
Yeah, it's it definitely. I haven't.
Hopefully folks have a good amount of questions.
Yeah, I haven't used this format, Rich, so you'd know better than I. What we've seen in the other formats is a lot of questions coming on chat, and even with the Meet the Experts, Jim, that I've done internally, we just did one for ALS last Thursday. There were probably 60 questions that came in on the chat, so people didn't ask.
Wow.
They typed them in, but yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Hi.
Hello, how are
Hi
you?
there.
How are you doing, everybody? Listen, I'm going to go throw a better looking shirt on. I'll be right back. We're going to be doing video, right?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
I assume so.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
All right.
I love that. Looked at herself on camera and said, not this shirt. Hi, Chelsea. Jim, Chelsea spoke at our NMO launch meeting in the US.
Oh, wow. Okay. It must have been good because it was a good launch.
She's incredible.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. Let us just talk about you, though.
Oh, I came in on a good time. I can't see myself though. Can you guys see me?
Yeah, if you go up to
how you doing, Chelsea? You should be able to turn the toggle the video on the top of your screen.
Next to the blue microphone.
Jim, and I'm just leaving mine off until we get started here momentarily, and then I'll flip mine on.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it works. It works. I don't need to see myself for a while.
I'm so sick of looking at myself.
Okay. I'm super close up. Let me adjust this. You guys gonna get like a super close up of my face that you never thought that you. Yeah, I had to switch from my desktop to iPad because my firewall was blocking the microphone and all the things.
Chelsea, how are you feeling?
I am feeling good. We're done with school. I called
Chelsea
it a
has
week
5
early.
kids, Jim.
I missed that.
Chelsea has 5 children.
Oh yeah, wow. That'll keep you busy.
Yes.
And you're homeschooling, right?
Yes, yes, all of them. So it has been interesting, but feeling good. Wendy, Zach's birthday was yesterday. Ella's was the week before. Those are 2 of my kiddos, and then my husband has a birthday next week. So May is always very eventful for us.
And probably hard because kids can't have a party, and you can't get the normal stuff that you would be able to get for them, right?
Right. So we had to get very creative, very creative. But that was fun too. And Ella said she had the best birthday of her life, and Zach said his was great too. So
Oh, Chelsea, that's awesome.
yeah.
It's so good to see you. I'm so excited.
It's so good to see you too. I'm still really close up, guys. It's like, okay. Do I need to make it taller so that you guys don't see? I don't know. Wendy, is this weird?
No.
Okay.
No, I think when it goes to the other screen, it'll break out a little bit. I think it's just because we're in these little boxes at the moment.
How does your hair look so good in the middle of a quarantine, Chelsea?
How does my what?
Your hair looks so good in the middle of a
Because
quarantine.
you can't see the top of my head, can you? That's probably a good thing.
That's the homeschooling. That's what she's been homeschooling
Yeah.
her kids on, how to do her hair.
Exactly.
That's actually not a joke. That's my girls are learning all kinds of new things.
There's going to be some feedback, Brenda, but
Wendy, how are you? Are you good?
I am good, thank you. I am. I think we're getting a lot accomplished in the midst of all this, so that's good.
Awesome.
How's that? Much better.
There we go. There's Lauren. All right. Jim, you got a lot of computer screens there.
Yeah, this is my home office. Just keeps me. You know yourself, when you're on a boring call, you want to be looking at other stuff.
What is it with headphones in my hair?
All right, that's what I can't use them for.
You look great, Lauren.
So who is everybody?
Maybe we do
I know
intros
Rich,
in a
And
couple
there's
minutes.
Jim, and then
And
Wendy.
Chelsea's on the bottom in the beautiful coral shirt, and I'm Wendy.
Yeah, I can see everybody's names and I highlight them. And then Brenda, you're not on video. Is she going to be?
Yeah, she's just getting squared away.
Okay.
Video on and dude.
So
We'll
who's
give it a couple
starting?
minutes.
Is it
So I'll kick it off and just introduce myself and cure a disease, and then I'll kick it over to Wendy. Though I don't see Wendy on here as a presenter, although I know you guys were
Yeah, she's
talking
there.
to her.
Yeah. No, she's there. I can see her.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wendy, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's got video. Where's your video? Put yourself so you can see everybody's faces. There's Brenda.
Hi, Brenda. Brenda, I haven't seen you in so long. Thank you for doing this.
Hey, Brenda, how you doing? Oh, your audio's off, Brenda.
There you go.
There, we
Okay.
can hear you now. So, see.
So Lauren, while Rich is getting audio back, what we talked about yesterday is Rich will introduce the event and cure rare disease. He'll pass to me and I'll introduce the panelists, and then Rich is going to kick off questions with Brenda, and then I'll go to Jim, and then Rich to you, Lauren, and then hopefully we thought we'd close with you. So the idea is that we would talk about Brenda's section with what's really happening from a clinic perspective and patient experience perspective, and then that feeds into supply chain curing.
All right, so we still have some people trickling here. So we can
I'm worried about this distort on the signal.
Yeah, he's just
Rich
gone.
just left. And then Chelsea, we thought after Lauren talks about her piece and the CRO role and research and the pace of research, and we close with you on a really high note about resilience.
Can you hear me?
How you're keeping
Yes.
yourself during this time.
Okay. All right. So, but Larry and Laggy. Okay. Should we kick off? Can everybody hear me? I'm gonna try and minimize my talking because I guess my internet's not cooperating right now.
Yeah, we can hear
let
you.
me turn off my video. I'll turn off my video as well just to save bandwidth so we can get a better signal. Okay. Okay, and just like that, magically the signal goes up. So just want to say thank you for everybody that joined today. I know Wendy and I were really excited to put this together a couple weeks ago, and really excited for it looks like the 62 people who registered and the people who are continuing to join. I just wanted to start off briefly by sharing a little bit about Cure Rare Disease. We're a nonprofit biotech based out of Boston, Massachusetts, where working to develop customized therapeutics for rare genetic diseases. And so you should be able to see my screen here. And I'll just briefly touch on this real quick before I pass the torch on. But again, Boston-based foundation started because I have a younger brother who has a ultra rare form of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and we are working with a number of collaborators to develop a customized solution for him and to look at scaling that to others who also lack an effective solution. So just briefly, you can see what we're doing. Some of our team is here with us today, including Lauren and Brenda. And essentially, we've developed a collaboration that's capable of bringing bespoke therapeutics from bench to bedside. And our first patient in this case is my younger brother, Terry, who you can see there with his wonderful service dog, Mischief. Today actually happens to turn out to be his birthday as well, so big happy birthday to him. And we're continuing to develop therapeutics for other boys with Duchenne as well to start off with, and we'll eventually spread out to other rare diseases. But just wanted to say a big thank you to Alexion and Charles River for sponsoring this. I'll turn it over to Wendy now for her to introduce herself and some of the speakers as well. Before doing that, I'll have the speakers say a brief few words about themselves before we get too far into it. But just wanted to say a big thank you and welcome to my two connections who were able to come, Lauren and Brenda. Thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to hear from you as well. And Jim and Chelsea as well. Really appreciate you joining. So with that, I'll turn it over to Wendy to say a few words, and then we can get into the questions.
Thank you so much, Rich, and thank you for putting this together and the opportunity to meet all of you. We're really lucky today to have a very diverse panel. This is not a webinar that's following traditional topics, and that's by design. We really wanted to answer questions and talk about things that we think are of utmost importance to the rare disease community during these unprecedented times. I lead patient advocacy at a company called Allocation, and we develop, discover, and manufacture drugs for very rare and ultra-rare diseases, and we take patient centricity really seriously. We really believe in listening to the patient voice and making decisions based on what patients and their caregivers and families need. So very excited to be here. On the panel today, we have really esteemed colleagues, and we're going to start with Brenda Wong. She'll introduce herself in a minute, but Brenda I first met you when I was working on a Duchenne program, and you are absolutely the most special person, and I'm so thankful that you're here and sharing your expertise. So we're really lucky to hear from you. Jim Redman is the head of supply chain and really holding the ship ahead in this time, and really going to speak to the efforts and the specific measures that pharmaceutical companies can take to ensure that your medicines get to you the way they should and safely and timely. And Chelsea is a very dear friend of mine who, in addition to being a mom of 5 and having a rare disease, is just a beacon of light in this time and all times. But she's going to talk about resiliency and the tools that she uses to power through. And Lauren, I'm not even sure if you remember, but we met a few years ago at a Charles River program, and to have the opportunity to hear from you about the pace of research and how important it is that we keep research going in these times. COVID has really demanded a lot of attention from regulators and physicians for all the right reasons, but rare disease has a much bigger impact on our society than COVID will be. So we really need to keep the pace of research going. So that's our panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Brenda to start.
Thank you so much, Rich and Wendy. It's such a pleasure to see you on the videos now that we're all socially isolated from one another. I am Brenda. I have been focusing on the care of patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy probably since I started the pediatric neuromuscular program at Cincinnati Children's, and that was probably when I met Wendy when we were at Children's, and there was a great opportunity to just really hone in and focus on just the care of Duchenne's and Becker's, just because of the multisystemic nature of the disorder that requires interdisciplinary care, and we feel that the optimal outcome would come from really connecting the dots for all the care needs, as well as connecting the dot for clinical research, because with that, we are able to participate in this whole process of more therapeutics to keep on improving the natural history. So with that background, I am here to share a little bit of my thoughts and on the questions that Wendy would have on your behalf.
Thanks, Brenda. So I wonder if you could kick us off with just giving us an overview on the impact of COVID-19 so far on clinical trials that we're looking to either enroll or were already active before the crisis broke out, and how you as a clinician have worked to changing that the trials are
Hey, Rich, we're having a real problem with your audio, so I'll jump in. Maybe you can log in.
Or needs of balancing.
So, Brenda, what Rich was asking, and I think one of the questions that came in from the communities is around keeping clinical trials going during this time. So when patients are either already enrolled or ready to start screening, how are you handling this in the with centers being closed and our virtual home visits really a possibility in the clinical trial setting?
Right. As with every aspect of life, COVID has greatly impacted on the area of clinical research. So basically, there have been a lot of holds on-site visits, and for the patients that we have here at UMass that would have to come are those who would really be needing for safety monitoring, and the rest, they would be modified to be on hold with virtual visits or having safety labs done locally. Now, there are some trials I understand that do have home visits, but from the interactions with families, we do sense that they have concerns for visiting nurses, and I know of one family that has really declined to have those home visits. So it has impacted the trials on that end. And I think the next phase would be looking at how that's going to impact the analysis of results just because of the difficulty in protocol adherence that way. In terms of enrolling for clinical trials, usually they are put on hold, except unless, of course, if it's COVID related at our institution. So that really being said, though patients are not actively enrolling, but I know from our end, we have been pretty busy on the regulatory aspects of getting IRB proposals submitted and budgets worked at. So in fact, it has been pretty busy because there's a number of trials for Duchenne's that's coming up. And that has kept our research coordinators really going so that in the event that the restrictions are lifted, as it is now with lifting and ramping up the clinics, we also foresee that being lifted hopefully in the summer, that we'll be ready to enroll just because we've done all that regulatory work. So behind the scenes work, I believe that's all going on. And there's been a lot of meetings and all, but it's just the active enrolling of subjects on sites that's kind of definitely on hold.
And Brenda, what about your patients who are in need of comprehensive clinic visits and the, the patients that are able to come once a year to your clinic and see all of the specialists at once, for example? How are those plans impacted, and are you employing new tools and techniques to meet their needs?
Yes, I think COVID has expedited the use of telehealth visits. We basically have worked out a process now where we have video telehealth visits with our families, focusing on a lot of the review of systems kind of issues, with nutrition, with weight, with questions on clinical trials. I am able to do a partial modified exam in terms of sometimes the parents are good at range of motion, right? So you kind of get them, put them on the bed, and they do that range of motion for me. So I have actually been able to assess that in some of the visits, and for families that have prepped the 10-meter run distance apps, and of course the Gowers, on the carpet. I have been able to get some of those functional measures done. So not ideal in the sense of like checking reflexes, which thank goodness we don't need it for myopathies, but certainly that has given enough information as to whether we are, stable compared to the last visit or not. So I think that has opened up the door towards probably a new norm of kind of some available video telehealth visits from patients from a distance if they don't really need to come for a full visit like once a year for all the testing. Of course, we are not able to get like cardiac MRs, PFTs, DEXAs, and X-rays, and that part is put on hold and broken up into like the next available when they're available to come back on site or get that done locally. So it is modified. The workflow hasn't been tweaked to be as efficient as a 2 days, get all your tests done, get all your wrap up with, but we are working around it. And I think the families are resilient. they do get around it, and we seem to be working it through a little, and hopefully it would get more streamlined as we do more of it. Right now we are doing like there was a week that I did almost like 70% telehealth of that week's visits, but of course a lot of it is still pending cardiac, pending pulmonary, pending the testing eval. So it's not as connected, right? It's fragmented. It's not ideal, but it takes lots more time to get the results back, evaluate again, go back to them. So it's more tedious in terms of that process, but we get to do it over a longer time frame. So we anticipate like the new norm for international patients whom we really don't know when they'll be here. and for those that is at a distance right now. But there are some families who really feel they really need to be on site for those where the boys are declining. So we have worked those in like a kind of semi-urgent need.
Thank you so much. And it's really good to hear that patients and families as well as you are adapting. Just a general question, how do you think patients are navigating this crisis and your peers? How's the culture? How are you all doing?
I must say I'm really proud of the little boys who have stayed at home for 2 months. I don't know how they do it, but a lot of our Duchenne families will tell you they haven't gotten out of the house, not even for groceries. They have been having groceries dropped off. And so generally, they have held on well, but I have had few families that reach out to ask whether the irritability, the behavioral outbursts, is that like part of Duchenne's or is that something else? I was like, it's COVID.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, cabin fever, right? So I think we did have to have, we did have to connect them to like telehealth psychology services, which is great that now that's made available with COVID. And that's been helpful. And reassuring the families that that is kind of expected, that the kids are reacting that way with a lot of behavioral outbursts. But generally on the whole, I think it's amazing how I have been to the office almost every day, and so I cannot imagine me staying at home literally for like 2 months, like what they have done. So they have done an amazing job.
I agree. And how are your colleagues? How's the culture at the hospital? Are you guys holding up okay?
Yes, for my team, I think for me and my admin, we're here every day just because there's a lot of patient needs, faxes and scripts and things to do. But the rest of the team work remotely. We have managed, although of course, working remotely for a team that works hand in glove has been quite time consuming with 10 emails just for one problem, and so you're literally stuck to the screen with emails the whole day. So I think I'm glad that we are now back for the first time. Everybody's back because we are starting clinics tomorrow, and it takes a lot of planning. The social distancing, we don't register outside. There's a lot of everybody's got to be like 6 feet away, and so cutting down the number of patients, which is not a huge number, but it's still like generating new workflows for PFTs. They generate aerosol, and so what do we do with those? And I think that has an impact on our trials that's using PFT as well going forward. So I think there's still a lot of kinks to work out in terms of guidelines needed for procedures to be done safely, both for the patient as well as for the providers or the caregivers.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is we'll definitely need a culture of patience and letting everybody work through what they need to work through and just being kind to each other going forward as well. I'd like to turn this over to Jim Redmond. Jim can introduce himself, but we're so privileged to have Jim on the phone today. He leads obviously a very critical function when you think about drug supply and manufacturing. It's obviously, we wouldn't be able to help patients with these meaningful medicines without it. But it's the way Jim leads that's so powerful and really special. Not a decision is made in his team without thinking about the patient that's actually going to receive the medicine and how that experience happens. So I'm excited to introduce him and welcome Jim.
Thanks so much, Wendy, and hello everyone. So look, I don't live in a dark room here. I'm based in Dublin in Ireland, and it's dark here because it's late at night. So that's why the lights are on. So look, hello everybody. I'm Jim Redmond. I am head of global supply chain for a company called Allocation. But I've got about 27 years experience of supply chain. I've done nothing else other than supply chain, and I've worked across many different industries, from electronics to food to big pharma, and ultimately biotech, which is where we are now. So what I plan to do is I've got a couple of slides, hopefully make them as interesting as possible for you. They're just to give you an idea of, I'm sorry, I'm just going to try and find them here.
And Jim's presentation was really a response to inquiries we got from the community about how does the supply chain keep going in the middle of a pandemic?
So can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to put it on to presentation mode. Okay, so hopefully you can still see that.
Perfect.
Okay, so when it comes to supply chain, and I know a lot of you are probably worried about, you know, supply to patients, as we are, but really there isn't any need to worry from a biotech perspective. Almost all biotechs operate in the very same way, and I'm going to try and bring you through some of that, and that will hopefully give you a little bit of comfort in terms of, you know, how we're set up, the mitigations we have, and first of all, why it's so important that we get the product there, but second of all, how we make sure that no matter what occurs, we can deal with it. There's one thing that I want to say at the beginning. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen here, this is the most critical measure that we have, and it's called months on hand. So for example, we look and say, what are we going to sell for the next 24 months? What's the patient need for the next 24 months? And I put a very simple example here. If that's 100 units per month, then we would typically hold somewhere between 1,800 and 2,400 units. And that's, again, a typical biotech. So one of the key things here is inventory and holding inventory in the right place. If you are, and I'll just touch briefly on some other supply chains. For example, food. If you're a bread supplier, you certainly wouldn't have months on hand. You'd have something like days on hand. And that's fast. You know, it's a very short supply chain. Most of your stuff is local. If you look at electronics tends to be very fast as well, but the supply chain is a lot longer because it's probably coming from the Far East or somewhere else. But it also has to, you know, if you look at TVs, if you look at video cameras or even mobile phones, as soon as you get one, they're almost obsolete. And the supply chains in those areas have got to make sure that they have the latest product on the market. When you get to big pharma, and I mean, when I say big pharma, I'm really talking about where the product is already off patent. The job there is just to make sure that you have product in the market, but it's not critical because the patient has an alternative. Then we get to biotech, where we know that patients do not have an alternative. So it's not a case of revenue. It's a case of making sure that no matter where that patient is, we have product at all times. So how do we do that? There's a couple of things, and I've got 4 things here on the right that kind of help us work through that. So we look at very carefully the location that we're trying to get to. How long does it take us to get there? What are the local challenges? Does it take us a long time to cross the border, for example? Is there a standard time for local testing of product and so on? Then we look at how accurate is the market information. So coming from in there. So we take all of that information. We then look at our inventory, as in, you know, the product that we have, and we say, well, okay, based on all of that, how much do we need to hold? Where do we hold it? And what are the key pieces of that inventory? And I will explain a little bit more about that shortly. Central allocation is a really, really important one. I worked in a company once where there was 2 supply chains, and essentially what happened was you had a European supply chain and you had a US supply chain, and they used to fight over who was going to get the inventory. Whereas when we have central allocation, and again, this is most biotech companies, all of the inventory will be in one place, and whoever needs the inventory will get it, rather than just because you're based in one place means that all the inventory will go there. And very importantly here is one supply chain view. So you can see right from the very beginning of where it starts, right to where it actually touches the patient. That means that you can move stuff around and you're not waiting on a whole load of different steps to happen. And the last piece here is agility. So one of the interesting things and one of the fun things about working in supply chain is that every day is different. There's a new challenge no matter what it is. So as life-changing as COVID has been, we deal with these challenges constantly. That's you know, if you speak to any supply chain professional, they'll tell you that the most exciting time is when they've got a challenge, and that could be a weather event, it could be a natural disaster somewhere. that, if you think about it, disrupts supply chains. And that's really when supply chain people come into their own, is moving around that and being ready to deal with that. So our agility, our reaction time, looking at trying to reduce waste, and that doesn't mean waste of product, that means waste within the supply chain, the process, so that we can be as quick as we possibly can. That's a very quick kind of overview of that, but they're really the 4 key things that any biotech supply chain will look at. This is the second slide, the only slide. If you look here, this gives you some idea of what the supply chain is. So any supply chain will start with your raw materials. There will then be your active ingredient manufacturing, where you make the core of the product. It's then manufactured, whether that's a tablet, a capsule, it goes into a vial. Once that's done, it's packed. It then goes to a distribution center, and then finally on to the hospital, pharmacy, or patient. If we go back and say raw materials, so raw materials come from many different places. What we tend to do is look at what's the critical ones and what's the lead time. So I've put an average kind of lead time on this. So it normally takes about 12 months to get the raw materials. We then have to manufacture the product, and that could take about 12 to 18 months depending. Once we've done that, we turn it into a tablet, a capsule, into a vial. You're looking at around 4 months for that. Packing, you're down to weeks, so it's probably 2 to 4 weeks. And then from the distribution center to the hospital or pharmacy is going to be 1 day. So any supply chain will typically hold everything in the manufactured drug piece. So as a tablet, as a capsule, or as a vial, but with no markings on it. And the reason for that is that's the safest way to hold it, because if something were to happen somewhere, we can react, because we can pack within 2 to 4 weeks, and we can get it into a distribution center and onto the patient within a day. So we hold almost everything there, so that if something happens like COVID, we can do that. And that gives us the greatest flexibility, because we don't know what's going to happen, and it's being able to react to that. So one of the other important things here is that from a biotech perspective, we generally tend to hold around 2 months on hand in packaged goods in the distribution center. So if you think about that, and what that means, 2 months on hand, is if we didn't supply anything else, we could keep the market going for at least 2 months. So as soon as COVID started, where we were, we upped that immediately to 6 months on hand, because we weren't sure what the disruption was going to be. And that's really why, from a supply perspective, nobody needs to be concerned, because almost all the biotech companies did the very same thing, because that's really how we operate. As I said at the very beginning, it's more important to have product in the market than not. So increasing the inventory in the distribution centers means that, again, if something happened, we would have 6 months that we don't need to worry about, because we can still supply every patient over that period of time. Within the US, as an example, we have 2 major distribution centers, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. But then we also have 9 or 10 different distribution centers around the US, and all of those are kept fully stocked so that we can always supply. And again, it's not unusual. It's not specific to Alexion. That's the way the industry operates, because of the necessity of the drugs. So that's a very quick overview. Hopefully some interesting pieces there for you. I will say again that, COVID has been a challenge, but a lot of the industry has been very successful in getting product to patient, with very few, if any, missed doses. So
Jim,
Wendy,
thank you so much. Do you have maybe a success story you could share during this time? I can think of a couple if you can't, but it'd be great to just share a success story from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. I think first of all, the fact that we haven't missed a patient is a great success story. But we did have, for us, we did have a 6-month-old baby that needed product quickly, and given all that's going on, and when I say quickly, we needed to get it there within 12 hours. We actually got the product there within 2 hours, and got it dosed within 4. So, you know, that's a great success in terms of being able to do that as quickly as we could, despite this pandemic that's going on. So, you know, and we see that around the place. I mean, it's not unique. There's a lot of that stuff going on. So.
Jim, that's amazing, and really just brings tears to my eyes when I think about all that family was going through. And in the background, they have no idea about the hurdles everyone jumped through to get that drug there as fast as possible. But kudos to you and the team and everything that you've done. Rich, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, Jim, really incredible work. I learned a lot in that session. The few minutes that you were speaking, I didn't realize how much went into ensuring proper supply chain continuity. So really well done. Lauren, we've got some questions for you. We'd love to hear your perspective on a couple things. Maybe I think just to kick off, we'd love to hear sort of what you're seeing. First of all, we'd love to introduce yourself and who you are and what all the great work you do. But beyond that, interested in hearing how the industry is responding to the crisis. You know, what are you seeing from the pharmaceutical side, given Charles River's really essential work in enabling drug development?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you great.
Okay. Well, I'm talking to you from my home base. I actually work out of my home usually in Central Maryland. And so myself, I haven't been too disrupted by all of this since I work globally on the telephones and webinars all the time. But I'm finding that other people that are collaborating, that are doing more of these kinds of group webinars and outreach sessions, are actually, in some way, there's sort of a silver lining on one tiny aspect of COVID, is that it's not making it possible for us to work together in person, but I think people are working harder to work together because they can't see each other. The upgrowth in telemedicine, I think, is a great thing, because think of it, there's a lot of people who can't get out of their small town to get to a big city hospital. If we develop that infrastructure better and devise solutions to this now, we'll be able to cross-apply that to possibly provide better outreach for each other. And I'd like to think that we'll be better about hopping on the phone with each other in groups to solve problems. Just like our team has worked together with curing rare disease and trying to find a solution for Terry. So my name's Lauren. I worked originally as a NIH postdoc. I have Maryland connections, so I grew up in Maryland. I worked at NIH, and then I moved back here recently. I have a degree, a PhD in pharmacology and toxicology, and I studied cultured neuronal cell lines when I was at the NIH, and later I went to Food and Drug Administration during the AIDS crisis. So I cut my teeth on public health just by working at FDA on the new drugs for AIDS. So it was a whole lot like the time we're going through right now. At the time, we had no cures. We had patients that were frustrated, patients that were not getting adequate care for their terrible diseases. And FDA really started working hard to try to escalate the amount of attention the AIDS patients got. They hired a lot of people. I was one of that crew. And they brought in a lot of fresh blood to try to triage those files. So I see a lot of parallels with what FDA is doing today to try to accelerate the COVID solutions, whether they're vaccines or small molecule drugs or repurposed drugs. You see a lot of activity on their website. You see a lot of the outreach asking you to turn in your ideas on how to accelerate your new drugs to them so that they can tell you, yeah, that sounds like a great acceleration. They're being pretty open-minded. Later in my career, I went to work at Charles River Labs. I've been here 18 years. I'm now a distinguished scientist. So I've been working, I guess, at a strategic level, not at running studies or doing sales or operational issues, but basically just using the FDA experience I had in counseling people to try to find the shortest path through all the complicated research you have to do. I have an interest in cells, and so I try to encourage people to do a lot of work at the cellular level to understand their drug pharmacology in a petri dish. The whole advent of being able to culture patients' fibroblasts and to study their genetic processes has been a wonderful tool. Our ability recently to get whole genome sequencing on people, to compare that more intricately and with greater detail with what's going on in animals has been a great advance. And so we're seeing a lot of acceleration going back and forth between in vitro cultures of human cells and tissues, and then work with animals that Charles River does. We also work with the human cells as well, and we also do biochemical assays. And so when I've chance to work with our scientists, they're at the bench, and they're also folks in the community, even parents, to try to find what is the fastest way of putting together a safe drug and a safe dosing regimen for a particular unmet disease. I've never been more challenged in my career than the last couple of years. I've worked on several N of 1 in personalized medicine files and helped found the strategic road into FDA to try to walk through the tightrope between different kinds of regulations. We want to make sure the drugs are safe and we don't overrush things into humans that have never been in humans before. It's a very delicate operation to try to say, well, we understand something in animals or we understand something in a petri dish, but do we understand it well enough to pick a safe range of doses for humans? That's something that you never want to rush too much.
Warren, do you see a lot of these changes that the FDA has made sticking in a post-COVID environment, or do you see a reversion back to the mean? You know, how do you see the FDA moving forward with some of these emergency actions and sustaining them versus falling back?
I always count on you for a good, thoughtful question, Rich, but I honestly don't know. I have a feeling that over the last 10 years, over the time that I've been in the senior part of my career, I have seen a lot of renovations and a lot of innovations. A lot of guidances have come out to try to work at the streamlining that we call it streamlining today. I'm not sure that there's a lot left to carve down. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think we'll want to put it back on, you know what I mean? It's like we've already down to our lean mass. We don't want to put that weight back on, you know? So I think that I don't think they're taking any particular shortcuts for COVID that are beyond what had already come to be the standard reductions. But they are trying to handle the files more expeditiously. They are pushing for pre-INDs more. They want to make sure that they have a chance to point out anything that's not necessary.
Oh, that's insightful to hear. And one of the last questions is, you know, how is Charles River, who's oftentimes not necessarily in the public eye, how is Charles River helping in the fight against COVID?
We're doing a lot of different studies. We have huge immunology departments, probably a couple of hundred immunologists worldwide. Charles River, as you know, has been sort of famous for its M&A over the last 15 years. We've purchased a number of large, pre-existing, well-regarded toxicology and biochemistry businesses and fused together their staffs in different teams. So we have immunology teams and molecular biology teams, cell biologists, and discovery scientists, like my colleagues, Dr. Keith Sutton, Dr. David Fisher. We work together very carefully when we get rare diseases or when we get innovations of any kind. It could be a COVID vaccine that's using a novel adjuvant. It could be a therapy that really doesn't have a testable animal model. It works only in a human pathway. Whenever Charles River sees a problem like this, they send it over to our scientific advisory services group, of which I named several people, and we sit down with and collaborate with the innovators, and then we try to say, what are the things that can be learned additionally from the Petri dish that can be learned in an animal? If nothing can be learned in an animal, let's try to devise a risk strategy where we go straight to the human. Now, as you know, in COVID, we can't get animals to get COVID in exactly the same way that humans do. Right now, we are seeing a few reports coming out that certain strains of monkeys, particularly African greens, out of Tulane Primate Center, Cynomolgus not so much, Rhesus kind of equivocal. I've heard tell of ferrets and cats, and even dogs have potential to get COVID. The question is there a convenient research model in which we can challenge with the virus and then actually simulate the human immune response? The problem being that we don't know what the human immune response is. So we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. It's hard to accelerate in that environment. So right now at Charles River, I'm ex-FDA. I still have close connections there. I make routine phone calls down to see if I'm reading the right articles and staying up on as much as they are on the news. Right now, they are working in two different groups. One group's working on the vaccines, and then the Center for Drugs group is working on the drugs. The Center for Biologics is working on cells and gene therapy. So 3 different sets of regulatory bodies are working on different types of approaches for COVID. And they approach them differently. What we try to do is at Charles River is stay in touch with every one of those different groups and what they consider to be the leanest and meanest and most possible way of getting something started in humans. I think it's important to say that anything that we do in human trials has to be safe. That's what the whole basis of our health and regulatory services are. FDA is the checks and balances. So we can't jump over what we consider to be good science. We have to learn what won't do harm, right? And we have to engage in a research environment in which we actively engage the patients and inform consent. So research has to be ethical. Research has to be carefully thought out in terms of the dose range. And then we have to have intensive monitoring that's appropriate to the type of patient enrolled in that trial. Remember, COVID vaccines would go into all different kinds of people. People with immune suppression, people that are elderly, children, women who could potentially become pregnant. Each one of those populations has to be protected from experimental drugs that could be harmful. So we take our safety role very seriously at Charles River to make sure that when something goes into the agency, they say it and they say, well, we like what's been done.
Wow. Well, that's really interesting. I know we've got some additional questions for you after the main panel here that have come in, but really appreciate your perspective. It's, I think to most people, the sort of drug approval process, as with supply chain from Jim, is somewhat of a black box. And so your comments have been helpful to bring some light to that.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, just to summarize, would love to say, well, just give me some of that stuff. I'm going to try it. We're going to, I'll take a sniff of COVID if it'll accelerate vaccine development. I got to say, COVID's a very, very toxic virus. I wouldn't be taking a whiff of it. And I think we need to be very conscientious about some of the stuff we read out there. It's nothing to mess around with. We don't know if we actually get cured of it once we get it. There's some very concerning reports lately of some recrudescence or reactivation of virus after people have had it. So we really don't know much about the protective immunity. And until we do, and until we have good testing, I feel like we are engaging in a very, very serious undertaking that needs to have our full attention and all members of the public health community fully on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Warren.
Thanks, and I am very privileged to introduce Chelsea, who's going to bring this home for us and make it real. Chelsea, in full disclosure, is a dear friend of mine. I think we're kindred spirits, although she's far more talented musically and artistically than I could ever dream to be. But I'm very excited to introduce you to her. And when Chelsea and I talked about this webinar, she is herself a rare disease patient. And she said, but that's not really what this is about. And we talked about her resiliency and her spirit, and that's what she's going to bring to the table today. So Chelsea, thank you so much.
Wendy, Rich, thank you so much for having me. When we talked offline about how this was going to work, I mentioned that I kind of have a unique perspective being an advocate for rare disease patients, along with being a patient myself, and what we've experienced throughout this COVID journey. So a little bit about myself. I am born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and that's where I'm coming to you all today from, Nashville. I am a mom of 5, and I'm an artist, as Wendy mentioned. And what I have realized through the process of listening to all the presenters is that in some ways, even though I'm not a scientist or a doctor or a researcher, we're all kind of going through a very, very similar process of figuring this out as we go along, and what that looks like and how much creativity it takes to do that. I know Dr. Wong mentioned that it takes many, many different steps to get to something that may have been easier to get to when you all were in person, when your team was in person. And so, and I hear so many wonderful words like adaptability and perseverance. And I think that that's a silver lining to this, if we can find anything positive about this experience, is that we've all had to really kind of figure things out and be creative and patient in the process.
When you think about your personal views, even before COVID hit, I would say you're one of the most resilient people I know. How is that intentional for you? And do you have a tip or two for our audience?
Well, I think that just part of the rare disease community and being a patient, if there's anything that we have mastered as patients and families, is adaptability and resilience. I think that we are the masters at resiliency and adaptability. So I think that personally for me, this has almost been like a grieving process a little bit. There are things that have changed a lot. And I mentioned that I'm a mom of 5. My kids are home now. And I know Dr. Wong mentioned her patients, the parents are calling saying, my kids are having some behavioral issues. Everybody's children are having some behavioral issues because it's such a change for everyone. And I think keeping that in mind has been so important because, not only are we all trying to figure this out, but we have children involved perhaps. And, as patients, I wasn't aware of how this was going to impact me in the very beginning. So my worries and concerns now are different, far different than they were a few months ago when all this was so new. And then I also think a large part of this is familiar. The constantly having to adjust and adapt. And I think that that's something that I've kept in mind, is that this is different, but it's figure outable. And it's been really helpful to hear different perspectives and how it all works. I think that for me also, Wendy, taking...
Hey, I need to call you back.
Wendy, you're on mute, I think.
Oh, sorry. At a very large patient meeting this weekend, Chelsea, it really ties in with what you were just saying. One of the advocates was on the stage and said, for the first time ever, the rest of the world feels the way we in the rare disease community feel. All of the time, scared, desperate for information, there is no treatment, and the future feels uncertain. And really, that's how we're all feeling about COVID.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
Chelsea, when you listen to your peers in the community, and I know you mentioned that you're a patient advocate, What are you hearing that we should all be aware of or that we should learn from? I think we're having a little bit of audio trouble. One of the other things I heard this weekend, Rich, and then we can turn it over to questions, is that in addition to understanding supply chain and how research is continuing, patients in the rare disease community really actively want to make sure that everyone is paying attention to rare diseases going forward, that the world seems to have shifted all to COVID, but what's happening in rare disease and with the Orphan Drug Act and other initiatives to really keep the rare disease policy agenda going is still critically important.
Absolutely. I think one of the challenging things has been, I think to maybe Chelsea's point earlier, one of the silver linings has shown that we as society can in fact come together and collaborate to develop an effective therapeutics quite quickly, right? This started in March, and now here we are in May with several phase 1 trials going on. Moderna yesterday reporting some seemingly positive results. So it is possible, right? And I think tying back to lessons that I hope stay with us is the lesson of, can we internalize this rapid idea of drug development for a particularly brutal disease? COVID's not the worst disease. COVID's not the best disease to have. Obviously, no disease is great to have. But the fact that we as a society and as an industry can unite together to defeat this in really fast time so far, with the big asterisks of, it's not done yet, but we're getting there, is really inspiring. And I don't know, Chelsea, you cut out for a second there, but wanted to turn it back to you to see if you had any final thoughts or comments to wrap up your insights.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, I just got to my most important thing that I was going to mention, and it cut right out. And I thought, what in the world? So I apologize for that. But just to kind of recap and reiterate that we are all going through something unprecedented right now, but that there's so much to learn. And just taking things one day at a time is something that I tell my kids often. And just knowing truly that we're all doing the very best that we can is something that has helped me tremendously through this process, and has helped to hear kind of the back end and behind the scenes on how it all works for a patient is reassuring to me, very reassuring.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Absolutely.
Thank you
yeah,
so
thank
much.
you so much for joining.
Thank you.
So I figure we have some questions that were submitted ahead of time. Maybe if we could segue into those. And for those listening in the audience, if you have questions, please do feel free to enter them into the chat bar there. Should be on your screen, and we'll try to field them. But a couple questions that have come up so far. I think, Warren, this is probably directed at you. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to start a whiteboard, and now I don't know how to stop the whiteboard. Oh boy, here we go. Lauren, let me ask you this question. There we are. So one of the questions we got is how is it possible to rapidly develop a drug and get a drug approved when traditional drug development simply takes many, many years? How is it that we're able to compress the timeline so significantly in the light of COVID versus other diseases that aren't at a pandemic status, or even HIV for that matter?
Yeah, I was going to go back historically, although it dates myself a little bit. When I was 31, I just joined the FDA, and it was the height of the AIDS epidemic, and we didn't have a cure. We had AZT, DDI, and DDC, and all three were toxic, and none of them are curative. And then right around that time, someone might be able to know this that I don't, is there was a Science magazine picture of the protease crystal, the HIV protease crystal was published. And within 2 years of that, we had an effective IND and clinical trials underway for the first protease inhibitors for HIV that just pulled the rug out from underneath the HIV ability to proliferate. So when you attacked it in its core and threw that monkey wrench into that little machine, you stopped HIV in its tracks. And all of a sudden, when we had been used to drugs that only dropped the couple orders of magnitude 100-fold, suddenly we were seeing tens of thousands of fold reduction in HIV numbers in someone's body. And the immune system could pick up and fight it at that point because it wasn't so overwhelmed. And today, those protease inhibitors are the core therapy of the many drugs that an HIV-infected person takes. And it has allowed them to live long and even moderately healthy lives when they might not have expected to back then. So all I can say is we saw the protease structure for COVID published a couple months ago. So you take my point. I'm very hopeful that all of the work that we learned back there in the 1990s will be cross-applied, and we can follow a similar path for developing an inhibitor for the viral replication. Now, vaccines, I'm hopeful of. I'm not laying any bets right now. I hope that it's easier than I think it is.
Right. Okay. No, thank
But
you.
I'm worried about the immunology of it. I honestly am. Every time you have a new virus like this, you have to really learn from scratch what its individual immunologic reactions, what its protective immunity is. And that's what we're just starting down the road to learn. We see that there's antibodies, but we all know that antibodies are not predictive of whether or not you're cured or whether you can defend yourself. They may just be a bystander. They may not be active in the right way. Now, we've seen that with AIDS too. We get antibodies to AIDS. So I just say that I play the scientific skeptic when it comes to vaccines at this point in time. I know a lot of our public policy makers have staked that we're going to have a vaccine in a year. I don't believe it. And I think I do have a lot more hopes for antiviral drugs based on our tried and true ability to crystallize those viral machinery and proteases. I do believe that that's real hardcore science that we can grow and we can accelerate.
Oh, Lauren, I was hoping you were going to be able to tell me when I could get out of my house again here, but it sounds like maybe not today.
Well, no. Good drugs are great. Can be a great thing.
Yeah.
What would I do without my ibuprofen in the morning and a cup of coffee?
There you go.
Thanks, Lauren. Jim, we have a question. They actually asked me to ask you, and I hope you know the answer. But someone is asking if and when they're able to travel again, but if they happen to get stuck and not be at home, how is the supply chain able to facilitate getting medicine at a different hospital than they would normally go to?
It's a great question, Wendy, and it's something that we deal with all of the time. So we have what we call a traveling patient process. So we would have locations in pretty much every country, including countries that we don't actually serve, and we organize to get our product shipped into a local facility where it's signed for, and then it's infused. So it's not something that we encourage necessarily, but obviously we have had, and certainly at the beginning of this whole crisis, we had quite a few patients stuck in different countries, couldn't get home, and we had to organize supply. So it's something that we have a process for that we use, and it's been very successful. So again, not something that people need to worry about, but certainly a great question.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, Chelsea, another question that came up that I have for you is how has your day-to-day changed, and what are the precautions that you're taking to preventing to get COVID? I know a lot of rare disease families will oftentimes have a designated person to go outside, but interested to see your perspective on some of the specifics around how you're safeguarding yourself and your family.
Sure. Well, thank you, Rich. I am not the designated person to go outside. My husband, whom I'm truly grateful for, is the one that if there's an errand to run, he does that for us as a family. But we have lots of things being delivered, and a lot has changed for our family, again, but so much has not. I know that taking a medication that suppresses my immune system long before COVID ever came around, I had to be very, very aware and very careful of what I was allowing to come within my sphere. And so obviously we are sanitizing everything. I only go out if I have a medication that I need to receive at the clinic. So I don't know how many days it's been. I think I've been in our house for 85 days or so, and out 4 times since then. And so that has been a change and an adjustment. but I don't think that as a family, for us personally, we can go overboard with the sanitizing and masks. And I think that that is something that I feel very strongly about. So also thankful that I'm not the runner that has to go out during this time, but we are definitely taking this very, very seriously and with all precautions. And so to that point also about the kiddos being at home, my kids have been home for the same length of time that I have. And it's tough for them to understand, especially my younger ones, why it's not safe to go play with their friends, or why that can happen. And so for their little minds to kind of understand, has been challenging. But we are definitely growing closer as a family because we're together all of the time. But it's also been wonderful in many ways to have this time with them.
Wow, 85 days is no short period of time.
No, it's not. And it feels like some days go on for longer, and then I look up and it's like it's 85 days. That went by extremely fast. But looking back to where I was in the very beginning and seeing where we are now, there's been a lot of growth. And I know for me as a patient, I feel more. I want to stay aware and informed, but it can become a bit of a scary process for me if I get on, media and watch what's going on. So I just use a lot of that time to speak with my personal medical team and make the best decisions for myself. And yeah, I think that that's been helpful for me.
Super. Brenda, I had another question directed towards you. How do you see hospitals, and this is a prospective question, so answer TBD. But how do you see hospitals such as University of Massachusetts Medical School adapting, moving forward once there is a vaccine or an effective treatment? How, if at all, do you see hospitals changing permanently? I think you're.
I'm sorry, that was off. Yeah,
No worries.
Time, we are on, this ramping up or reopening, but not really reopening because, there was still some clinics for urgent patients. And I think for the short term, we can see a lot of restrictions in the number of patients at one particular clinic space. So that's rate limiting on the number of patients. But I think in the event that there are treatments and there are vaccines, then really we would not be that much needed for the social distancing. But in terms of the hand hygiene, that stays. I think now it's the new norm, right? Wash your hands and no more handshakes, I think. So that I think we're very mindful, as what Chelsea has said, being patients and families who have immunosuppression drugs or our hem-onc patients. I think they have been trained from the beginning and in pre-COVID days to be mindful of hygiene to prevent infections. And I think going forwards, really, even though you have a vaccine and treatment drugs, I think this need to prevent infections, maybe the new virus that comes along next. I think that is key, is not to abandon the hand hygiene that's much needed. But social distancing, I think that should probably go away slowly because it then would enable groups of more than 10 to be able to meet. We could have face-to-face meetings. I think there's still value in face-to-face meetings. I think this virtual meetings are great, but there is so much more out of face-to-face meetings. And I think even our conferences where you have, hundreds of people, I don't see that in the foreseeable future for this year to have like a conference of 600 people. But certainly that is something to look forward to for the hospital as well, to enable, I think, the students to get back, because right now we are limiting number of people in clinics, limiting like interns on site and things like that. So I think with that, that should scale up if there's a vaccine that is effective and if there are drugs that are effective. So hope that day comes, soon, that we can really get out of this set of restrictions and for travel as well, because right now, like out of state patients too, I mean, there's always the question about which state are you coming from? Do we have to do COVID testing for an out of state?
Right.
Yeah.
And just wrapping up, I think this is our last question, but we had Liz ask for you, Dr. Wong, if we have time, what are the strategies that you're considering putting in place to continue trials if in-person is not available for the foreseeable future? Can you pivot without a change in protocol? And are trials still recruiting now, although they're not to the degree that they're actively being dosed?
I cannot speak on behalf of the sponsors, but I think at this point in time it's very protocol driven. There would have to be a lot of changes for the evaluation assessments to enable data that will be valid for analysis. So I think there's probably a lot of work to be done in order to look at the possibility of no on-site evaluations to standardize everything.
Yeah, and Brenda, I can speak a little bit to some of what we're hearing. I'm on a committee with people from several different companies specifically about clinical trials for rare disease patients, and there are a number of unique strategies that are being employed. And one, for example, is if a major academic center in a major city has been impacted dramatically by COVID, can we move the study site to a more rural hospital where there's less risk? So things such as physical, logistical. We also identified, while there were some hospitals that were completely closed due to COVID, it was really certain parts of the hospital that were impacted and other parts weren't at all. So could we physically within the hospital create a clinic center for clinical trial screening of patients where they could go in a back door and not be exposed? So strategies like that logistically. The other issue is something Rich mentioned earlier, which is the FDA has actually been very flexible about what's called study amendments. So any changes to a study that's already in process, they're accepting those on a real-time basis and evaluating them very quickly so that sponsors can make these adjustments to keep trials going. I will tell you that we're very concerned about maintaining the pace of research and not letting there be too much of a delay. That is happening, but a lot of work is being done to make it be as short a time as possible.
Well, yeah, that's very helpful.
Well,
All
I
right.
wanted to just say that, we are concerned about COVID, but we've got about 40 different COVID programs rolling, but we've got 140 rare disease programs rolling. So I don't think that one precludes the other. It's like all of the folks that are working in the biomedical industry, whether it's the CROs or in the industry, are working to just a minute. There we go. Are working overtime. They're working shift work. They're working with protective masks on and gloves on, but they're still working as fast as they can on life-saving medicines. I believe that, like in our company, there has been no diminution in research for rare disease, even though we've got COVID on, programs coming in. Companies have been of less urgent matters have been very good about sort of waiting in line for the more urgent programs to go first. And I think that everybody recognizes the societal needs for us to keep maintaining multiple balls in the air in terms of both rare diseases and COVID.
Thank you. So I think that's the webinar then. I just wanted to take a moment to really thank our panelists, Jim, Chelsea, Brenda, Lauren, and with my co-moderator here who saved me in the beginning, Wendy. Really appreciate everybody taking the time out of their busy schedule to join us and peel back the layer of the drug development onion, so to speak. This webinar will be available online for folks to piece of it or would like to share it with friends. And again, a big thank you to our sponsors, Alexion and Charles River Labs, for not only your presence here, but also your support of the webinar program overall. I think it's critical that people understand drug development isn't going anywhere, and that the supply chain is stable, and that clinicians are still working with patients, and patient advocates are still fighting the good fight. So again, a big thanks to everybody, and look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Thanks, Wendy and
Take
Rich.
care.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.